Rollans, the managing editor of Brush Education. Let's talk about sustainability in the independent Alberta book publishing industry. When I think about sustainable independent publishing, I think about it through three different but interconnected lenses. The first is perhaps a less obvious one, social impact. Like everyone else, publishers want to be a positive contributor to the world we live in, and what we publish plays an important role in that. The circulation of knowledge and ideas is critical to tackling the issues we collectively face in the world today, and books play a foundational role in that circulation. Even books that aren't on specifically environmental topics play a role. They are key to our cultural health, to our cultural sovereignty, and to cultural change, all of which underlie successful sustainability initiatives the world over. That's why cultural organizations around the world are pushing for a cultural goal to be added to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, that's UNESCO, Sustainable Development Goals. So the second lens is maybe the most obvious, it's environmental impact. How do publishers' business practices directly or indirectly impact the environment? This will be the main focus of the rest of this video, but it's closely tied to a third lens, which is the sustainability of the profession of publishing itself. In order to make sure important ideas continue to circulate, which is that first lens of sustainability, publishers have to make choices that don't threaten the health of their businesses. This means balancing environmental sustainability priorities, the second lens, with other publishing priorities and making choices that support all of those. Luckily, we can make a lot of choices that do exactly that. So let's talk about some of those choices. Publishers can, of course, make the common sense choices that everyone else can make, such as using more efficient lighting in the office, reducing their air travel, walking to work, and so on. But I want to focus on more publishing specific choices. In particular, I want to focus on paper. That's because paper, more than anything else, is the biggest emitter of carbon in publishing, far more than flying to conferences or even shipping books. Now, if paper is such a problem when it comes to sustainability, why not just avoid paper altogether and only publish digitally? Well, digital publishing has its own complications in terms of both publishing and environmental priorities. For one, although digital formats like EPUB and audiobooks are everywhere today, research shows that readers continue to prefer to read on paper over any other format. So eliminating paper books just wouldn't work for most publishers at a business level. Additionally, it's important to consider how much the sustainability of digital publishing relies on consumer behavior, which is outside the publisher's control. Compared to paper books, e-readers are really carbon intensive to make, about 100 times more intensive than your average paperback. So the sustainability of digital reading depends on how much or how long readers use their e-reading device. If they read at least 100 books on that device before they get rid of it, they'll come out even. If not, they won't. But for the publisher, smart and efficient paper use is the best way for us to reduce our carbon footprint. It has a positive impact on another big emissions area too, which is shipping. Shipping big, heavy books is more emissions intensive than shipping small, light books. So what choices can publishers make to improve how they use paper? Here are a few that I think are the most important. First, they can choose responsibly sourced low-impact paper stocks. Usually this means Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, certified papers, especially those with high or 100% recycled content. The process for producing paper from recycled material is much less carbon intensive than producing paper from trees. Second, and I think most creatively, they can make production decisions that reduce the paper needed for a project. This could include the decision to use trim sizes or book dimensions that create the least waste at the printer. It can also include the decision to print on thinner paper stock and a whole bunch of design decisions around margins, typeface and font size, and blank pages that help make a book more compact. This is an area where environmental priorities and publishing priorities really need to be balanced, but they also complement one another. You could dramatically reduce the carbon footprint of a book by using the smallest possible font size, for example, but doing so would make the book unpleasant, if not impossible to read. So, design decisions that limit paper use have to be balanced against the need to create books that readers want to pick up and read. After all, a book that readers do not read is the least sustainable book of all. So, the third choice I want to talk about is that publishers can choose to work with printers who have transparent environmental policies and practices that match publishers' own sustainability values. They can also prioritize working with printers who are closer to where the books will be sold to reduce the distance books need to be shipped. And fourth, although this may be more luck than choice, they can try not to print more books than they can sell. This is not just a good business decision, it also limits the amount of overstock or unsold books that the publisher may eventually need to recycle. Actually figuring out what the perfect number of books to print is, however, is notoriously difficult. We publishers can't tell the future any better than anyone else. Still, there are some printing options that can help publishers avoid overprinting, like short print runs and print on demand or digital presses. This is another area where sustainability and publishing priorities need to be balanced. Usually, shorter run printing options come with more limited choices in terms of paper stock, ink, trim size, and cover options, and they may simply not fit every project. Beyond that, when you print fewer copies of a book, especially if you're printing on demand, one copy at a time, the printing cost per copy increases. A more expensive book might not sell as well, which brings us back to the problem of unread books. A book that isn't read isn't sustainable. Shipping can also become a bigger issue with small print runs. Shipping books one at a time or in small batches is not only more expensive, it's more carbon intensive than shipping lots of books all at once. So it's a complicated calculation to figure out the best number of books to print for any given title, but trying to find that sweet spot isn't only good for business, it's better for the environment. Those are the things that publishers have control over. But at the end of the day, sustainability in publishing is an issue that needs to be prioritized across the supply chain. Small publishers in particular don't have a lot of direct control over the emissions created by the different players in the publishing supply chain and the life cycle of a book, such as paper mills, printers, shippers and distributors, bookstores, and consumers. It's easy to say, print your books close to home, but there are no printers in Alberta, and the cost of printing books in Canada right now is outpacing the price that readers will accept when buying a book, which makes already tight sales margins even tighter. It's also easy to say, only print the books you need, but again, that number is elusive. So even when we think we know how many to print based on large pre-order sales from booksellers, we're also often faced with large returns on those pre-orders, which can leave a publisher figuring out what to do with a bunch of copies of books that they thought they'd already sold. So the challenge is, how do we small publishers, with our many hats and limited resources, get everyone in the supply chain on board with more sustainable practices so that the choices we can make can have a greater impact? There's no easy answer to that. What we can do is keep talking to our supply chain partners about how their practices affect our practices and the environment. And just like with the books we publish, we can keep trying to be part of that positive systemic change. Finally, there's one more related challenge I want to highlight, which is communication, letting people like you know about sustainable practices in publishing. Some publishers are able to do this through certification processes like becoming a B Corporation, and these certifications can make communication with the public easier. They're standardized, credible ways of showing what you're doing. But they also demand significant and ongoing resources and reporting commitments that can be challenging for small organizations to meet. For many of us in the indie world, it can be more effective in terms of actually improving our practices to invest that time and money in more immediate material and action-based sustainability initiatives instead, sometimes at the cost of advertising what it is we're doing. So if you're interested in what an indie publisher is doing to reduce their environmental impact, do look for the FSC logo and do look for certifications and do look for messaging on their websites, but also don't be afraid to just reach out and ask.